There is a version of your life you have never lived, a version where money works for you instead of against you, a version where you wake up without the quiet dread of checking your bank account, without the silent arithmetic that runs in the back of your mind every time you buy groceries or pay a bill. That version of your life is not a fantasy. It is not reserved for people born into wealth or gifted with extraordinary talent. It exists, and it is separated from the life you are living right now by something far simpler and far more difficult than any financial strategy you have ever been told about. It is separated by identity, not knowledge, not income, not timing. Identity. Most people spend their entire lives consuming financial advice without ever confronting the single most important truth in personal finance. You will never consistently behave like an investor until you genuinely believe you are one. You will read the books. You will watch the videos. You will open the brokerage account. And then, somewhere between the first market dip and the next unexpected expense, you will quietly go back to thinking like an employee, because that is what you were taught to be. And what you were taught to be has become, over years and decades, what you believe you are. This video is not about stock picks. It is not about which index funds to buy or how to time the market. Those conversations, while occasionally useful, almost never change anyone's financial life because they address the symptoms while leaving the disease completely untouched. The disease is a way of thinking, a way of seeing money, time, risk, and self that was installed in most of us before we were old enough to question it. And until that way of thinking is replaced at the root, no amount of financial information will produce lasting change. By the end of this, if you stay with it and allow yourself to be genuinely uncomfortable with some of what is said, you will understand not just what investors do differently, you will understand who they are differently, and that distinction is everything. Let us begin with an honest look at why most people stay financially stuck for their entire lives. Not because they are lazy, not because they are unintelligent, but because the mental framework they are operating from was never designed to build wealth. Think about the way most people experience money. It arrives on a schedule. It is tied to time exchanged. A certain number of hours worked produces a certain number of dollars received. This is the foundational transaction of the employee mindset, and there is nothing inherently wrong with it as a starting point. The problem arises when people begin to internalize this transaction as a permanent identity rather than a temporary arrangement. When the exchange of time for money stops being something you do and becomes something you are, the game is already being played on the wrong board. The employee mindset is fundamentally reactive. It waits for money to arrive. It responds to financial circumstances rather than designing them. And because it is reactive, it is also deeply emotional. When money is tight, fear contracts the decision-making process. When money is abundant, relief loosens discipline. The financial behavior of most people oscillates between these two emotional states, fear and relief, without ever breaking through to something more stable, more deliberate, more structural. This emotional volatility is not a personal failing. It is the predictable output of a system that taught people to associate money with survival rather than with possibility. When your financial baseline is scarcity, every financial decision carries a weight it was never meant to carry. And under that kind of weight, long-term thinking becomes nearly impossible because the brain, under stress, does not naturally think in decades. It thinks in days. This is why lifestyle inflation is so insidious. The moment income increases, the brain, still operating from scarcity logic, interprets the extra money not as capital to be deployed, but as relief to be consumed. A better apartment, a newer car, nicer clothes, dinner at, restaurants that would have felt impossible 2 years ago, and none of these choices are irrational in isolation. The problem is the pattern. The problem is that each increase in income is met with a nearly proportional increase in spending, ensuring that the gap between what comes in and what is kept remains perpetually narrow. And it is only in that gap, the space between earning and spending, that wealth is ever created. Lifestyle inflation is the enemy of compounding, and compounding is the only force in personal finance that is truly transformational over time. We will return to that. But before we do, we need to sit with another deeply uncomfortable reality about how most people approach markets and investing when they do eventually try. Because even when the employee mindset motivates itself to invest, it almost always does so in the wrong way and for the wrong reasons. Emotional investing is one of the most expensive habits a person can develop. It is the behavior of treating financial markets the way most people treat social media. reacting to noise in real time, making decisions based on how something feels rather than what it is worth, buying when excitement is high and selling when fear is high, which is almost perfectly the inverse of what produces returns. The person who buys a stock because it is going up and sells it because it went down has not invested. Have gambled on momentum and called it investing to feel more sophisticated. The philosophy that produced perhaps the most extraordinary wealth-building record in modern financial history operates on a completely different axis. It operates not on the axis of price movement, but on the axis of value. The fundamental insight is this: a share of stock is not a ticket in a lottery. It is fractional ownership of a real business. It has earnings, it has management, it has competitive position. It has a trajectory, and the price the market assigns to that business on any given day is often wildly disconnected from the actual value of the business over the long term. This single reframing from price to value, from market noise to business fundamentals, is the foundation of the investing identity, and it changes everything downstream. When you see a stock's price fall and your first instinct is panic, you are thinking like a speculator. When you see a stock's price fall and your first instinct is curiosity, is the business still sound? Is this an opportunity? You are thinking like an investor. Those two reactions are not just different strategies, they are different identities expressing themselves through financial behavior. The philosophy Warren Buffett has lived and written about for decades makes this distinction with extraordinary clarity. He has spent his career making the case that the stock market is not a device for generating short-term wealth, but a mechanism for transferring wealth from the impatient to the patient. That is not a trading tip. That is a statement about character, about the kind of person you have to become to actually win in the long game of building wealth. Patience in this framework is not passive. It is not waiting and hoping. It is the active discipline of resisting the emotional pull of the present in favor of the rational logic of the future. Every time you do not sell a quality asset in a panic, you are making a decision. Every time you do not chase a hot trend because it feels exciting, you are making a decision. And those decisions accumulated over years are the actual architecture of wealth. Now let us move into the deeper lessons, the ones that, when genuinely internalized, begin to shift the identity from employee to investor. The first lesson is about the difference between earning and owning. The employee mindset is oriented entirely around earning. How much am I making? How do I make more? Is there a promotion available? Can I take on more work? Can I take on more work? These are legitimate questions, but they are all oriented toward a single input, labor, and a single output, wages. The investor mindset, by contrast, is oriented around ownership. What do I own? What are my assets producing? What percentage of my income comes from things that work while I sleep? This is not abstract. Real businesses generate real cash. Real assets produce real returns. The goal of the investor identity is to gradually, systematically shift the source of income away from time exchanged and toward capital deployed. This does not happen overnight. It does not happen in a year. But it begins the moment a person decides that their goal is not simply to earn more, but to own more. Buffett's approach to investing has always centered on owning pieces of businesses he would be comfortable holding for 10, 20, or 30 years, not trading in and out of positions based on quarterly earnings or market sentiment. Owning with conviction over time. That is the philosophy of an owner, and it begins before any stock is purchased as an identity. Ask yourself right now, do you think of yourself as an owner or as an earner? The answer will tell you more about your financial future than your current income ever could. The second lesson is about the relationship between risk and understanding. Most people are afraid of investing because they associate it with risk, and they associate risk with loss. This fear is understandable, but it is also based on a misunderstanding of what risk actually is in the context of intelligent investing. In the framework built by Buffett and his intellectual predecessor, Benjamin Graham, risk is no. Primarily about market volatility. Risk is about the permanent loss of capital, and the single most effective protection against permanent loss is understanding. Specifically, understanding the business you are buying into deeply enough to have conviction about its long-term value, even when its short-term price is falling. Buffett has repeatedly made the point that he would never buy a business he does not understand. This sounds almost too simple to be profound, but consider its implication. Most retail investors buy things they do not understand at all. They buy a ticker symbol because someone on the internet said it would go up. They buy an asset because the price is moving in an exciting direction, and when the price reverses, they have no understanding to anchor their conviction, so they panic and sell at exactly the wrong moment. The antidote to fear is not courage. It is understanding. When you genuinely understand what you own and why it is worth owning, fear becomes far less powerful. You can look at a falling price and see it for what it sometimes is. Not a warning, but an opportunity. Not a reason to leave, but a reason to look more carefully. This requires work. It requires reading. It requires thinking. It is not as immediately gratifying as watching a price chart climb, but it is what separates speculation from investing, and it is what makes the investor identity wood durable under pressure. The third lesson is perhaps the most counterintuitive in an age saturated with productivity culture and the worship of constant action. It is the lesson of inaction as discipline. The investor mindset understands that doing nothing is often the most powerful financial move available. The employee mindset, shaped by a world where visible activity is rewarded, finds this almost impossible to believe. We are conditioned to associate effort with progress, action with results, busyness with productivity. But in investing, the most expensive mistakes are almost always made by people who could not sit still. Buffett has described his ideal holding period as forever, not until it becomes profitable enough, not until it becomes profitable enough, not until it reaches a target price. Forever, this is not laziness. It is the expression of profound conviction combined with a deep understanding of compounding. When you own a genuinely great business and you do nothing, something remarkable happens. The business continues to compound. Year after year, the earnings reinvest, the competitive advantages deepen, the value grows, and every time you would have sold out of impatience or fear, you would have interrupted that process and paid taxes on it. The lesson here is not to buy randomly and hold everything forever. It is to be so selective in what you buy that selling becomes almost never necessary. That set them. Selectivity is itself a discipline. It is the discipline of waiting, of watching, of doing the work to understand a business fully before committing capital. And then, when you do committing with the kind of calm certainty that does not need to check the price every morning to feel confident. Most people will never reach this kind of certainty because they never do the work to earn it. They invest impulsively and then wonder why they cannot hold through volatility. The conviction was never there because the understanding was never there. Build the understanding first. The conviction follows. The patience follows from that. The fourth lesson is about the cost of waiting for certainty. There is a painful irony in the psychology of the employee mindset when it comes to starting. The same person who will spend freely on things that depreciate will delay endlessly in deploying capital toward things that could compound. They will tell themselves they need to learn more, understand more, save more, wait for a better time, wait for the market to correct, wait until life is more stable. And in the meantime, time, the single most valuable resource in compounding, drains away unreplaced. The mathematics of compounding are not intuitive, which is part of why they are so consistently underestimated. Money invested over a long period does not grow in a straight line. It grows in a chi, reef that accelerates. The early years of compounding feel almost meaningless. The later years feel almost miraculous. And the only way to experience the later years is to have survived the early ones without quitting. A person who begins investing a modest amount at 25 and continues for 40 years will, in almost every realistic scenario, accumulate substantially more wealth than a person who begins at 35 with a much larger amount on the same time horizon. Not because they were smarter, not because they made better picks, but because they gave compounding more time to work. They paid the price of early patience and received the reward of late abundance. The investor identity understands this deeply. The employee mindset anchored in the present tense cannot fully feel the weight of those numbers because the future feels abstract and the present feels immediate. Shifting that relationship, learning to feel the future as vividly as you feel the present, is one of the core psychological moves of the identity transformation. The fifth lesson is about the relationship between simplicity and sophistication. There is a temptation, especially for intelligent people entering the world of investing, to seek complexity, To believe that the path to superior returns must involve sophisticated instruments, intricate strategies, constant monitoring, and specialized knowledge that most people do not possess. This belief is not only wrong, it is actively dangerous. The investment philosophy that produced the most remarkable long-term record of wealth creation in modern history is, at its core, strikingly simple. Buy great businesses at fair prices. Hold them for a very long time. Do not let short-term noise override long-term thinking. Maintain a margin of safety. Never invest in something you do not understand. Keep costs low. Be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. None of these principles require a finance degree. None of them require access to proprietary data or special relationships. They require something far rarer and far more valuable: the emotional and psychological discipline to act on what you know to be true, even when the market, the media, and the crowd are all telling you something else. Simplicity in investing is not the beginner's version of something more sophisticated. It is the destination that most sophisticated investors eventually arrive at after years of complexity. The investor who holds a small number of deeply understood positions in genuinely great businesses, who reinvests dividends, who does not trade frequently, who ignores the daily noise of market commentary, that investor is not unsophisticated. That investor is operating at the highest level of the discipline, because the hardest key thing in investing is not finding the right stock. The hardest thing is having the conviction and the patience to hold it through years of volatility, distraction, and doubt. Simplicity serves that discipline. Complexity undermines it. Now we arrive at the transformation, the moment worth spending time with. The moment of imagining what happens when a person genuinely makes this shift, not just intellectually, not as a temporary motivation that fades by next month, but as a permanent reorganization of how they see themselves in relation to money. Picture someone 5 years into this identity. They have been investing consistently, not perfectly, but consistently. They have not chased every trend. They have not panic sold in every downturn. They have read, learned, grown in their understanding of the businesses they own. They have exercised the discipline of inaction when inaction was required. They have increased the gap between what they earn and what they spend, not through deprivation, but through deliberate choice. They have treated lifestyle inflation as a conscious decision rather than an automatic response to rising income. What does their financial life look like? The numbers are beginning to reflect something that did not exist 5 years ago. Passive income, small at first, perhaps a dividend here, a reinvested return there, but the structure is present. The found and 'tis real. The assets they own are generating income that does not depend on their labor. And each month, that passive income grows slightly because the assets themselves are compounding. More importantly, something has happened internally. The relationship with risk has changed. They no longer fear market downturns the way they once did, because they understand what they own well enough to see downturns as information rather than catastrophe. The relationship with time has changed. They think in years and decades, not weeks and months. Their financial decisions are no longer primarily emotional. They are primarily rational, not cold or detached, but calm, deliberate, anchored in a clear understanding of where they are going and why. Now picture 10 years in, the compounding curve, which was nearly imperceptible in the early years, has begun to bend upward. The portfolio is generating income that, while perhaps not yet equal to their salary, is no longer negligible. It is covering meaningful expenses. It is changing the calculations. For the first time in their adult life, the question, what do I have to do to keep the lights on, is no longer the only lens through which they see their work. They have options. Not unlimited options, not yet, but options they did not have before. And the most profound change is not in the numbers. It is in the identity. They no longer think of themselves as an employee who invests. They think of themselves as an investor who also works. The order has reversed. The hierarchy has shifted. Their labor is now a choice made in the context of a larger financial architecture, not the architecture itself. This is the identity shift the title of this video refers to. Not a single dramatic moment, not a lottery ticket or a lucky trade, a gradual, consistent, disciplined evolution of self-concept that eventually produces a fundamentally different relationship with money, with time, and with freedom. The path to this shift is available to almost anyone willing to take it seriously. It does not require exceptional income. It does not require extraordinary talent. It requires the decision to stop seeing yourself as a passive participant in your financial life and to start seeing yourself as its architect. It requires you to treat your capital as if it matters, because it does. It requires you to educate yourself not through frantic consumption of content, but through deep, slow, patient study of businesses, of economic history, of how value is created and destroyed over time. It requires you to develop the emotional resilience to hold your convictions through periods when the market seems to be telling you that you are wrong. It requires you to resist the powerful gravitational pull of present consumption in favor of the quiet, less immediately gratifying work of building something that will last. These requirements are not small. They explain why most people never make the shift, not because they could not, but because the path demands something that our culture consistently undervalues: the willingness to delay, to endure, to play a game whose rewards are not visible for years. But here is what is also true: the alternative, staying inside the employee mindset, trading time for money indefinitely, allowing lifestyle inflation to consume every raise, remaining emotionally reactive to every market movement. That alternative also has a cost. A very high cost, paid not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow accumulating weight of decades without financial freedom. Every year that passes without making the shift is a year of compounding that does not happen. And unlike most things that can be recovered, time cannot. The compounding that did not occur in your 30s cannot be recreated in your 50s. The decisions made today or not made today will be felt in ways that are very difficult to reverse later. This is not meant to create panic. Panic is the enemy of clear thinking and the enemy of good investing. It is meant to create clarity, the kind of calm, serious clarity that precedes meaningful action. You are not too late if you start now. You are not too early if you are young and too. His feels distant. The right time to begin building the investor identity is the moment you understand that you need one. That moment is now. The final thought worth leaving you with is this: the greatest investors in history did not simply discover a superior strategy. They embodied a superior way of being in relation to money. They were patient when the world was impatient. They were calm when the market was chaotic. They were certain when others were confused, and that certainty did not come from arrogance or from luck. It came from the disciplined, years-long work of building genuine understanding. You do not need to become anyone else. You do not need to mimic another person's portfolio or replicate another person's moves. You need to do the slow, serious, deeply personal work of building your own understanding of the businesses you choose to own, of your own emotional patterns, of the principles that will guide you when the market tests your convictions, as it inevitably will. Start small if you must. Start uncertain if you are, but start as an investor. Not as someone who is learning about investing while waiting to become one. As one, decide today that this is what you are, and then build the knowledge and the behavior to match the identity. That decision, made seriously, held consistently, acted upon with patience and discipline, is the beginning of everything. If this moves something in you, if it shifted even slightly the way you see yourself in relation to money and time, then sit with that, let it settle, and when you are ready, return to this channel, because this conversation has only just begun.